DNS or domain name service. In this video, we will understand what is DNS, why is it required, how it works, and what are the solution types on cloud and on premise for the type of DNS service based upon customer requirement. So here we start. Now, in this slide, we have two scenarios. Scenario 1 on the left side and scenario 2 on the right side. Well, in first scenario, we have a user who wants to access three different servers. Well, in that case, the first server has an IP of 10.0.1.10, second one has 172.16.1.10, and other one has the IP address of 192.168.1.10. In that case, remembering all these three IP addresses just for three servers becomes a cumbersome issue for the user. And that is where scenario 2 comes into picture, wherein the user, instead of remembering the IP address of these servers, just remembers the names, that is Alice, Amit, and Andy. And how is that possible? Because internet works on IP addresses and not usernames. That is where DNS comes into picture. So earlier the user has to remember the IP address of all the servers. But no, that responsibility has been offloaded onto the DNS server, which keeps the mapping of the URL or the domain name to that of the respective IP. So now let's say user wants to access the server with the name Alice. For that, it will first reach out to the DNS asking that for Alice, give me the IP address. And that is where the DNS provides it with the IP 10.0.1.10 of the Alex or Alice for that communication. Same is the case with Amit. Request goes again to the DNS asking for the IP address of the URL or the host Amit, and DNS provides the IP 172.16.1.10 for that communication, and that happens. Well, in that case, we see how easy the life becomes for the user who just does not have to remember all the IP addresses, because remembering the names or the domains is much simpler, much easier as compared to remembering the IP addresses. And that is primarily possible because we have that DNS service. Now, DNS service makes it possible that both the worlds are happy. That is the internet world or the communication world, which requires the IP addresses, and also the human world, which just wants to remember the host names or names, not the IP, because IP remembrance is quite a difficult task for humans. That's what, or rather, that's how we have been fundamentally made. And thanks to DNS, this is possible. Okay, moving on to what is DNS? As we earlier discussed, domain name service. And DNS resolves the domain names to the IP addresses. So it has a repository which makes sure that there is mapping between the domain name and the IP in its database so that the user requests can be accordingly complied and the respective IP address against that domain name can be shared to the user machine for that communication to happen. In this slide, we will understand how the DNS actually works. So let's say here we have a user who is using a laptop for communication with the web server over the internet, which has the URL abc.com. However, the user is unaware of the IP address because it needs an IP address for communication. So first of all, the user machine will look into its internal cache. Does it have the entry, that is IP address, in its cache for the abc.com? Let's say it is not there. So after that, the second step is that the user will request for the DNS related information from its DNS resolver. And generally, DNS resolver is the ISP DNS server which holds the detail of the IP address against that domain. So in here also the DNS resolver, when it receives the request from the user machine, it will first look into its cache memory. And let's say that information is also not available in its cache. So next step is the DNS resolver request is forwarded towards the root server. Now, root server does not have the IP address binding or the IP address detail for the abc.com, but it knows where to send the DNS resolver to for that query. So it sends the detail about the name server TLD, that is for .com, so that name server TLD can provide the right information to the DNS. Name server TLD also does not have the IP, but it knows what is the authoritative DNS or the authoritative name server which has that IP and domain name binding. So it provides information to the DNS resolver that for getting the IP, you move on towards the authoritative DNS. And then the DNS resolver sends this request to the authoritative name server. Now, authoritative name server has that binding abc.com to that of the IP address, which is 1.1.1.1, and it provides this information to DNS resolver, which updates into its cache and also sends this information back to the user, who now has received the IP address 1111 against abc.com, the URL it wanted to access. So it will be able to access IP 1111, which is the server whose domain name is abc.com. And this is how overall communication via the help of DNS happens, where the user does not need to remember all the time the IP address. And through the domain name or the URL, it is able to access. And that service of remembering the IP is given to DNS. DNS. There are different type of vendors who are providing the DNS service, whether it is on-premise appliance based or cloud based upon the requirement type. So on a very high level, the DNS service has been divided into two types. One is appliance based on-premise solutions by the vendors, and other types are cloud based providers or cloud based solutions which are provided by the vendors. So top of the list is Infoblox for the appliance solution, which also provide DHCP service. It also provides IPAM service also. Rather, there are myriad of services that IPAM provide. Same is the case with BlueCat, Efficient IP, F5, A10, and in fact, Men and Mice. And it does not stop here. There are other service providers also which are providing the appliance-based solutions. Now, let's look at the scenario where the appliance based solution may not be the best solution for the corporates. They don't want to manage that appliance, maybe power issue, maybe space issue, or such type of thing, where they want it as a service. And that is where cloud providers come into picture. Amazon, Google, and Azure are the forefront DNS service providers who provide that service. Rather, it is as a service, and you don't need to manage the compute or the hardware or the appliance in that case. And we have then Cloudflare, DYN, which is now Oracle, and Cisco Umbrella also, which are the competitors into the cloud provider DNS service providers and who are doing a great job. Hope the information shared in this video was informative, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.